Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome to Inquirer Live, and happy Pride Month. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm Annie Bryan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a digital editor here at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I am also a queer person, coming to you live from my home in the neighborhood in Philly. And as both a journalist and a member of this community, I am always looking to seek how to uplift the voices of other LGBTQ people in the Philly area. And today we get to celebrate, honor, and reflect on another Pride amidst the pandemic. Pride is about celebrating the joys of being queer and shining a light on the accomplishments of our community. But it's also about taking stock in how far we've come over decades and decades of activism led by powerful queer voices who came before us. It's about identifying what immediate hurdles we face, as well as what we have to break down, and collectively really looking ahead at what comes next in our fight for equality. And before we get started, I just want to go over a few quick housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. And please do, at any point during the discussion, you have the opportunity to submit your questions for our special guest, who I'll introduce in just a moment. And to do so, please ask your questions in the comment section down below at the bottom of this page. If you're watching from social media as well, please visit inquirer.com/repkenyattalive. Again, that's inquirer.com/repkenyattalive to submit your questions. So with that, I am thrilled to introduce State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. He is the first openly gay person of color on the Pennsylvania state legislature. So Representative Kenyatta, welcome. How are you?
Hi, good. I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation. And I love what you said about Pride. You know, for me, it really is about taking stock of where we are, about all the work that has that has not yet been done, and also a real reminder that that flag was paid for with blood, sweat, and tears of folks who've come before us, who put us in a position to even be able to have a conversation like this.
Yeah, exactly. And for our audience, Representative Kenyatta and I are both young, queer, engaged Philadelphians. And I want to just set the stage a little bit that what we're talking about here today, what we've talked about so far and really what's to come, is really not a conversation about political semantics. The LGBTQ Employee Resource Group at the Inquirer, PRISM, they and I have been, working closely together to come up with questions that we think can really help our audiences navigate and reflect in this moment. That said, queer perspectives and queer people are often seen as sort of inherently political, but I'm not a political reporter or an opinion writer, and this is not a platform for that. This is a personal one-on-one conversation between Representative Kenyatta and I about our own experiences. And really to get some information out of the unique background that Representative Kenyatta has with LGBTQ rights, both in terms of identity and his background as a community organizer and now representative, which we hope can be useful, applicable information. So to kick it off, I would love to ask a couple of questions about marriage equality. Sorry?
So let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Heck yes. So to kick off the questions, I'd love to ask a couple of questions about marriage equality. And obviously we can't possibly touch on every issue pertaining to queer people in this special event. And we'll have many more Inquirer Live events to come to cover the broad spectrum of all it is that queer people experience and the issues that we face. But we can use this moment to look at really marriage equality as kind of a starting point. We're just a few days away from the anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling that made marriage equality the law of the land back in 2015. So Representative Kenyatta, I'm curious, do you remember what it felt like when it passed, where you were, anything that was going on for you?
I remember it actually really vividly. Growing up, I could have never imagined that I would be talking about, marrying my partner, Dr. Matt, one day, about sharing a home, having a dog, all these different things that for straight folks is not only normal, but in some ways, there's this expectation, right, that you do those things, that you find a partner, that you get married, and those things always felt really out of reach, especially once I did, come out, to my family, and then, to myself, and I'm sure we'll talk about coming out.
Yeah.
That is a multi-step, multi-layered
Yeah.
process. But I was actually in Atlantic City, and I'd just gone down for the weekend, and I will tell you, I had a real like knot in my stomach the entire time we were waiting for this decision, because at least how I remember it, maybe we all knew the day was going to come out, but you never know exactly, right, when the Supreme Court will release their decisions, and it just felt like it was delayed and delayed and delayed. And so a part of me, I was like, okay, they're not going to allow it, and I was like, don't get your hopes up. This is what's going to happen. It is what it is. And I remember just going out on a walk on the boardwalk that morning. It was pretty early, I think, when the case came out, and I was just mentally preparing myself to be disappointed. And when the case came down the way that we all know it came down, I remember just bursting into tears. And with my boyfriend at the time, just feeling this incredible weight that felt like it was being lifted, and being able to envision a whole different version of my life that just minutes before, I was telling myself, don't be stupid. They're not going to legalize gay marriage. And so whatever hopes and dreams you have, Malcolm, get it out of your system,
Yeah.
because they are going to rule, in opposition to us.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to come back to sort of that theme of being able to envision a future for yourself and how important that is for queer people in just a little bit. I remember that I was working in a local newsroom in DC, and I wasn't out just yet, at least not to other people and not fully to myself. But I remember just running to the Supreme Court steps and crying as a very good ally, wink, wink. But I knew deep down that there was probably something else that was making me so emotional. But that said, since then, it's in the past year, especially, on a more serious note, we've seen real threats to marriage equality surface, or seemingly real threats at least, and then they kind of get swept under the rug. There have been comments from Supreme Court justices about reversing marriage equality. So I'm curious, from your perspective, are queer people still at risk of moving backwards on marriage equality, and what threats to reversal have we squashed versus what sort of still remains?
I highly doubt that the Supreme Court would take up a case that would completely reverse marriage equality. But what has been so unfortunate is, still in state statute. Obviously, federal law supersedes state statute, but still in state statute, something as simple as saying, hey, this is no longer the law of the land. We should take this out of state statute. I have the bill that would do that in the House. My former colleague in the House, and now in the Senate, she left me to go to the Senate. So Senator Kenyatta, if you're watching, I've not forgiven you for going to the Senate. But no, she's my good friend, and she's taken up this bill in the Senate, and we have not been able to get movement on this, right? And this is just about, at this point, cleaning up our statutes, which is something we do all the time, to say, hey, this is no longer applicable. Let's take it out of state law. And that's a small thing, but it's a big thing, right? Because our laws ought to reflect our values. And if this is a value that is no longer one that we hold, if we understand, like most Pennsylvanians understand, like most Americans understand, when you look at support for marriage equality, I mean, it's really through the roof. And so it is really common sense to make sure that in our law, and certainly in our culture, that we take out things that are discriminatory, and really speak to a past that we never want to go back to. And so that is something that is really unfortunate to see, that something that simple, but also that sort of impactful, that we can't even get a conversation or a vote on it right now.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And are there dangers, specifically at the state level or lower level courts to marriage equality that we should be kind of keeping an eye out for, or is it something that queer people, watching this should feel pretty settled in this moment?
I think as it relates to marriage, I would say, listen, go find somebody you love, get married. I think on a marriage piece,
Yeah,
I think we're fine, right? But as it relates to the lives of queer people, which certainly are so much bigger than just marriage equality, because I do like to remind folks that even getting married, right, pretty middle class pursuit in many ways, and there are a lot of poor queer folks who don't have as the center of what they're thinking about marriage. And I think those threats certainly remain, because even as we can get married in Pennsylvania, we still lack basic non-discrimination protections. We have reintroduced the PA Fairness Act. Myself, Representative Sims, Representative Benham, and Chairman Dan Frankel, who has introduced this bill session after session prior to to any of us being elected. We've reintroduced that bill yet again. And what is so unfortunate, and what I think just frustrates people about politics, certainly as somebody like myself who came, to the political process as a community activist first, is seeing our government's inability to do the things that we seemingly all agree with. You're a reporter, you're super smart, and sure some of your colleagues have been looking into this. If you go through and look, you get over the needed 102 votes of folks who during their campaigns say they support non-discrimination for LGBTQ folks. I mean, I think if you looked at everybody who won election and look at their platforms, you probably get 110, I would assume, folks who openly say, I would support non-discrimination protections. And yet, this bill, we cannot get it to the floor. I remember when I was first elected and former Speaker Terzai came to Philadelphia and had a meeting with the Philadelphia delegation. And this was one of the issues, with myself and Bryan being the only two queer members at the time before Representative Benham, both from Philadelphia. This was an issue we both brought up and said, hey, Speaker Terzai, you say you support this. Can we get a vote on this? And I believe he sponsored the bill, or at least said he would sponsor the bill. And we still did not even get a vote. And so, just think about the fact that you can be married, but you can still in Pennsylvania legally be kicked out of public accommodation, still have risk of your housing being taken away from you. I mean, this is absurd. And depending on what municipality you're in, you either do or don't have those basic protections.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually, kind of related to something else that I wanted to ask you, which is, timelines around marriage equality and even LGBTQ rights more broadly often sort of end in 2015. The concept for so many people is that what happened in 2015 was what we were looking for. It was what queer people needed, and that's said and done. But it was a very slim vote. It was 5-4 for Obergefell versus Hodges. So I'm curious, what has changed since then, legally, socially, not just in terms of the rights that we have on paper, but in terms of sort of broader queer acceptance. What have you seen sort of happen since then in terms of really in terms of our kind of regrouping as a community on the push for equality?
Well, I think, and I think you just look. I mean, me sitting here with you having this conversation, we've now elected 3 openly gay members, openly LGBTQ members of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. And I said in some comments I made the other day, really that's not cause for celebration in my view. That's really an indictment of how far we have to go, that out of the 203 members, there are only 3 of us who openly identify as LGBTQ. However, slow progress is progress as well. And you can look up, over at Erie, where Tyler Titus, they will be, if elected, the first non-binary and trans county executive in American history. They may represent, if I'm correct, and I believe I am correct, that they represent the first time Democrats have nominated for county executive, even non-binary or trans person. And so, talk about a leap forward. I mean, you go back to 2015, and that would have been absurd. Just the idea of it would have been absurd. And, they wouldn't have been judged on, what they want to do to lift up our kids in schools, what they want to do in housing or wages or whatever. I think a lot of people would have said that's a non-starter. So we do see a culture changing where you have somebody like Pete Buttigieg, who runs a national campaign where certainly I feel like it was discussed, but not in the ways that I would have expected. I mean, he won the Iowa caucus, for Christ's sakes. And, there was a lot of debate, but it was on the issues that he was talking about and on his ideas. And that feels really good that we are in a place where I think most people, not everybody, but most Americans are not asking whether folks look like them or love like them. They're asking if they share their beliefs. And so I think politically we see more and more candidates stepping up to run, all across the country. And I think we are at a real high watermark. Also, when you look at Congress with Mondaire Jones and Richie Torres, Mondaire is a good friend of myself and Dr. Matt, being elected, pretty handedly. So that speaks to where the zeitgeist of most Americans are, that queer candidates can run and that not really be the focal point of their race. And that is an incredibly powerful thing to witness. But it also, as I said, that has not necessarily led to us moving these bills, because the progress that we've made has been very, very slim. We still, LGBTQ folks, represent less than a percentage point of all elected officials in the entire country. So we've made a lot of progress, but Lord knows we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said about, how candidates have been able to come forward with platforms that aren't just about them and their identities. I know as a journalist, I was always worried that, if I came out, that would become sort of my beat, that would become my topic that I was pigeonholed into. I'm very, very grateful that hasn't been the case, but it's certainly something that, I think at the beginning of my career and when I was studying this, that was a very real concern and absolutely could have, gone differently. And I know, of course, that this topic of marriage equality, obviously, hits home for you. Congratulations on your engagement.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about, when you think about your life with your partner, I'm wondering, did you ever weigh, the possibility that marriage equality could be reversed? I know that, I had queer friends in the past year who were looking at the headlines that they were seeing, looking at the news that they were seeing around comments on reversing, marriage equality, and they were worried. They were wondering, should I get on this and do this thing now? And I'm wondering if that was ever something that came up for you in your personal life, and if you ever felt any of those concerns, or if any of that ever, impacted your personal life.
Well, I'll tell you, no matter what, I'm keeping this ring. Such a cool ring, my engagement ring.
Yes. Love it.
You know what? Frankly, no. My partner and I met after the Oberfeld decision, and so I'd never felt concerned about that in particular. But I did feel concerned, and still, reading through the Fulton case, which just Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, about sort of adoption. The case, at least from what I read of it, very, very narrow. The Supreme Court basically says that cities can implement non-discrimination ordinances, but has to be done even-handedly, across the board. And so, happy to see that written very, very narrowly. But that was something that we've been talking a lot about, worried a lot about, really terrified to see that decision, because a big part of what you also think about, right, when you um, dedicate your life to somebody is, hey, do we want to have kids? Do we want to, do all the things that, again, a lot of my straight friends, may take for granted. And, just think about that. Every single step of the way, there is a real question of whether or not things that are so fundamental, whether or not those things will be allowed. And I would just urge folks who are allies, or maybe just learning how to be allies. I mean, just think about that. That just until last summer, folks had to be worried. I mean, certainly probably not at the Inquirer, but at other places, folks had to be worried that, hey, if I put up a picture of myself and the person who loves me best, I could possibly lose my job. And we've had folks who've lost their jobs because of their identities. That's why I started by saying, there are folks who really put everything on the line to move that Overton window to a place where less people are focused on this in the negative aspect, but still you see in all the different things that are related to marriage and building a family, those are still open questions, still very much open questions about whether or not we'll be able to live our lives with a level of equality and dignity that should be afforded to all Americans. And so, I certainly, feel desire to move past the engagement, and get married. But I think our issue is more, I just want to get married in my living room and then like be done.
Yep.
And Matt wants like a big thing. So
100%.
that's the big debate right now.
I totally hear you. Yeah, my fiance and I are similarly trying to figure out how to not have to pick out colors and linens and all of these things and just be married. So
Thank you. Thank you. See, I
Absolutely.
would tell Dr. Matt, everybody's on my side. We should just get married in my living room.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll be rooting you on. Well, actually, I'm going to jump ahead to a question that I had actually lined up for a little bit later, but you brought it up, and it's such a natural time to chat about this. When you mentioned people having concerns about posting a picture of themselves and the person that loves them best, I thought that was very poignant. And I've heard you tell your story in other outlets, including an incredible interview that I listened to with drag star and activist Marty Gold Cummings. And you shared with them that you have been given advice actually to kind of turn down your queerness in front of the public, and to restrain your presentation and sort of reduce your media appearances with your partner to really present as less out for the sake of your career. Yeah. And I mean, that just weighed so heavy on my heart. And I was curious, I know you said that you pushed back on that concept, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about those experiences, whether that one or others, and how they kind of shaped the way that you do or don't talk about your partner and your personal life in your career.
Yeah, I say all the time that this was, and it's a short little story, but this was probably the most important decision I made when I decided to run for office. I had somebody who was a supporter of mine. I always preface and tell people, I mean, they supported me, they voted for me, and I had my launch video, folks, I'm sure it's somewhere online. But my launch video when I ran for state representative, and to me, it was really a throwaway line, frankly. Where I was running my campaign talking about deep poverty. I grew up very working poor. Got my first job at 12, all those different things. And so that really was the focal point of my race for my mind. But I did mention that, I'm a poor Black gay kid from North Philly running for office. And, me and this person were having breakfast at a pizza shop. So obviously this was going to go very wrong. Why the hell would you have breakfast at a pizza shop? But this is where we were.
Hey, I'll have breakfast.
Right? I don't know.
I'm not joking.
And so after they watched the video, I'll never forget, they were like, "Oh my God, that video, that's so nice. But you're gonna delete the part about saying you're gay, right?" And I was like, no, no. They were like, oh, well, you're gonna lose. I support you, I love you, but you're gonna lose. And I said, well, you know what? I'll lose because I think we owe it to people, particularly as elected officials, to be honest with folks
Mhm.
about who we are. Um, and I know it was important to me to basically say, listen, I will, win, lose, or draw. When this is all said and done, right? When I'm not invited to any more Inquire Lives because I'm a old has-been politician and nobody wants to hear from me anymore. I have to look in the mirror and see myself and
Yeah.
see myself. And if I couldn't do that, and if voters weren't receptive to that, then so be it. Then so be it. I was not going to twist myself in knots to hide something that is just a part of me the same way it is for any other straight politician. If you go to an event, you may or may not want to bring your spouse based on their level of their level of involvement, how involved they want to be. And so I have been very blessed to have a partner who bravely walked into this with me and said, listen, we are going to be who we are. And I think the power of that, this is something I say all the time. Bravery begets bravery. Bravery is it's infectious, just like fear is infectious. And what I am so moved by all the time, running for office is hard, hard work, but I get messages all the time from people saying, oh my gosh, you know what? I'm going to run now, or I'm going to come out of the closet now because you reached out to me. I literally posted, with their permission, a statement that somebody sent to me, a message somebody sent to me, basically saying um, that they and their partners, came out to their family. It was super horrible, and their families were not supportive, and so they had been, very quiet about their relationship beyond their family. And they said they saw me and Dr. Matt just living and existing,
Mhm.
and that it gave them the bravery to go public with their relationship. And that was something, you could have never expected or guessed, when I launched this current campaign that I'm in, never expected or guessed that it would impact people in that way. But it really, really has. And so I always say that was one of the most important and best decisions I ever made, to be exactly who the hell I am for my own personal sanity, but also for the residual bravery that has come from other people. And that person who sent that message, when they tell their story, there are going to be a bunch of people who see their story and also decide to step up and be brave. And so that is the power of being out. And I know Harvey Milk would talk about that all the time, that if everybody came out, it would help in discrimination. It really would.
I love the phrase that you said, residual bravery. My one of my dearest friends jokes that a lot of my friends are queer, and a lot of us came out kind of in the same few years,
Mhm.
especially around when gay marriage was legalized, because we could start to imagine futures for ourselves. And my friend now jokes that everything I touch turns to gay because that residual bravery happens, because that sort of ability to share who you are and what you feel, and your sort of truest self, and bringing your
Mhm.
whole self to everything that you do is it's only possible when you have examples sort of in front of you. So
That is so true, particularly for young people, right? Because we can't. And I talked about this, I guess, maybe a year or so ago. I shared for the first time publicly my coming out story on the House floor, as we were talking about extending non-discrimination protections. And I think I said in those remarks that it's so difficult for kids to be something they can't see. And
mhm.
so we can't simultaneously say as adults, we care about bullying in school, and, we need to stop bullying in school, but then say to kids, once you become an adult, we can't wait to discriminate against you.
Yeah.
That does not that does not inspire confidence in young people.
Yeah.
That
Kids are
coming out
smarter
is
than
the right
that.
thing to do.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Kids are smarter than that. They know.
Kids are
And they
so
can see
smart.
it. Yeah, they are. It's scary. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about, the why it's important for young queer people of color to see you and your soon to be husband and prominent public facing roles, and what your experience was like as a kid, in a time when marriage equality was not the law of the land.
Yeah, I think that because it really matters for policy, right? And not just for public policy, but you think about organizational policy for nonprofits, for profits, whatever. It really matters because each of us governs and leads from our personal life experiences. I mean, there's no way to separate the experiences that you've had, that lived experience, from how you operate in the world, right? How you operate in the world is directly in line with those experiences that you've had. And when we have so few elected officials who have, as I often say, who have skin in the game as it relates to the decisions that are made, I think it stifles certain conversations that we need to have. If we are going to, as elected officials, but also as folks in your field, right, who are telling stories and talking about issues, I mean, what people read in the Inquirer, that's how most people engage in what's happening around them through what is reported. And if we don't have reporters, if we don't have elected officials who represent the fullness of the American experience, then that experience is not going to be represented in what folks read, and certainly not going to be represented in the legislation that is put forward and passed. And so when people can see themselves, I think, A, they can take a greater sense of confidence, have a greater sense of confidence that their needs are going to be talked about and reflected in the decisions that we make. But also, it encourages, as I said, more people to step up and run, step up and become, a reporter, or, decide to apply for that management role in their company, whatever the case may be. And it is important that young people see that. I mean, if you look at the statistics from the Trevor Project, and if folks don't know about the Trevor Project, it is one of the best organizations in the world. I love the folks over there so much. The work that they do around suicide prevention for young LGBTQ folks more broadly, is groundbreaking and has been for a long time. And a part of what their statistics show us is that rates of death by suicide and suicidal ideations are so much higher for young people who identify as LGBTQ, so much higher. And a part of the reason that is true is because what they envision for themselves, in many cases, there is no well-worn path for them to follow. And that is so disheartening in a way that I think some people might not feel like they can connect with. But I would ask people, just think about any of the ways in which your identity is marginalized, but particularly for LGBTQ folks who represent every race, every gender, every ethnicity, every age group, every religion. I mean, we are a group that represents, we cut across. And there are millions of Americans, so many young kids, who desperately need to see themselves reflected so that they know tomorrow is worth living, and that they matter, and that there are folks that see them and people that they can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My partner volunteers with the Trevor Project. And yes. And, I deeply, deeply worry about the way that this past year is going to affect young queer people, because I have seen stories already about, kids who are non-binary who used to sort of change their clothes and be able to code switch a little bit when they got to school, or paint their nails when they got off the school bus, who haven't been able to do that in the past year, and who haven't been able to kind of, live in different environments the way that they've needed to. And I'm incredibly eager to empower those kids and help them see that there is an opportunity beyond this pandemic, beyond the past year that we've had, where they can live those full lives, and they will be able to have big, beautiful lives for themselves in adulthood. And on sort of a related note, I know you and I have chatted a little bit, and we both grew up obviously in a time when marriage equality was not the law of the land, but we also both grew up in religious homes, and going to church every week. And I know that that's something that
multiple times a week. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. And I know that you and I share that, and I know that you've spoken about that at length publicly. I know you've spoken about growing up in the church and the struggle to kind of find the power inside you to come out despite the messages of hate that you had heard. And obviously that's not the case for everyone who is queer and identifies with a religion or grows up with spirituality really centrally in their lives. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of your experience and how you did find that power within yourself to come out despite what you had heard, and despite the sort of anti-LGBTQ sentiments that you had been surrounded by.
To be honest, and it's why I said earlier on that, for me, there was a two-step process, right? I think I came out before I came out to myself, which is weird, for people who don't understand that. I was outed. And so I had I think, and it's why I feel so strongly that we should never, ever, ever be outing people, and that everybody's going to have a different journey and path to coming out. But I'll never forget, I was coming home from church. I got ordained as a minister in my church, grew up in a Pentecostal Christian household. And in the message randomly, it was Bible study. And the message was about honesty and about how important honesty was. And, somebody who, was 16 at the time. And so somebody who I was talking to was friends with the younger sister of one of my mom's friends. And that younger sister told my mom's friend that, I was kind of talking to this guy, and my mom's friend told her. And I'll never forget walking in the house from church. And the first question my mom asked me when I opened the door, she was like, "Are you gay?" And if, first we're like having this stare off. I'm like, what is the answer that you want in this moment?
Yeah.
I'm like, what should I say? But ultimately I was like, yes. And my mom was like, you need to go. You need to leave. Ultimately she didn't let me leave. She was very torn because she was like, where are you going? I'm like, you just told me to leave. And she's like, you can't leave. But she certainly, said a lot of the same hateful things that, I would go on to hear from other people, and that I really feared, and that it kept me in the closet. And, thank God that prior to my mom passing, she was really able to move from what I call tepid tolerance to full acceptance of who I was. And I think for me, the bravery really kicked in, when I said to her, we're either going to have a relationship or we're not. And you're either going to fully accept me or you're not. And I'm not going to live some life and have some relationship with you where a core part of my life I have to not show you or actively hide. I refuse to do that. And for, my first 2 years in college, my mom and I did not speak that much. And when we did, it was not like great. And it was scary. But I really was like, maybe we won't have a relationship. And, anybody who knew the relationship I had with my mom, we were so incredibly close. But, there were these inflection points where I sort of made the decision that me being able to be exactly who I was more important than anything else, and that I was no longer going to carry the deep depression, the pain, the anxiety, the constant fear of, is somebody going to see me? Am I standing in a way that is, perceived to be masculine enough? Am I speaking in a way that is perceived to be masculine enough? Am I doing this in the right way? I was so sick of that, and for me, I was so lucky to find friends in college and to come out right before I went to college, to find people sort of who just accepted me 100%. And I think those relationships, frankly, helped me to have some of that bravery, knowing that there were people who loved me exactly as I was.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And is there, when you look back at who you were before you were able to come out, or before you were outed and then came out, is there anything that you would want to say to, like, little Malcolm Kenyatta? Is there, looking back, is there anything that any young queer person struggling to come out in any circumstance, religion aside, is there anything that you would want to kind of impart in your 2020 vision, and with your sort of ability to look in hindsight and offer wisdom?
Yeah, the first thing I would say to, the 16-year-old Malcolm, like, don't buy these shoes. They were like these shoes. They weren't necessarily like Pride, but they were super colorful. And when I came out, I would wear them all the time as a freshman in college. And like, in retrospect, I'm like, how was I not?
We all do that, though. We all do that. We have a moment where we need to, we don't know how to quite express ourselves yet. So we swing
I was like,
fully to one side of, yeah.
So in retrospect, I made some fashion choices my freshman year that I would not
We've all been there.
that I would not have made. But on a more serious note, I would just tell myself that it will be all right. And, that is so simple in terms of its delivery, but so powerful in terms of its impact. When I was in the closet, there was this constant feeling of, I guess, when is the bottom going to fall out, right? And I just talked about it just before, like, when is somebody going to know? When, is somebody going to tell somebody, and then, something happened to me? Or, there's just this constant feeling of the unknown, of feeling like you'll be exposed in some way. This sort of public, flogging that you prepare yourselves for. And there's a tension that comes with that. And I use that analogy of, the public flogging, because just think about anybody, like, think about, how your body tenses up before you get a needle, or like before you anticipate pain. If you have like a good trainer, like before you go to the gym, you're like, this stuff is suck. And just imagine walking around like that all the time.
Right.
And there is this like tension that you just hold in your body, that you hold in your spirit. It's this feeling of never quite being able to relax or get comfortable. And looking back, I was so terrified of what was going to happen if somebody knew. And having that taken away from me, certainly I did not like the way that it was done, but knowing that it was something that was off the table now was something that freed me in a way that I never felt freedom. And so I would tell my little self, don't be afraid of being free, because that is the only thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, don't be afraid of being free. It's a good takeaway. I have a few more questions that I want to ask, and then I want to get to the questions that I've seen in the comments as well from our audience. So I'll just ask a few more that I'm itching to ask, and then I swear I'll turn it over to some of the questions from our readers.
You're a reporter. You have questions. That's how it goes.
Yeah, too many, perhaps. I know one of the things that we've come back to a few times now is, the topic of sort of passing as straight and fitting into a mold, even after I'm out in the queer community. I know many members of the queer community obviously celebrate marriage equality, but also feel torn and even perhaps betrayed by the sort of heteronormative definitions of what it means to have a wedding, what it means to get married, what it means to be a spouse. And I mean, I know in my own planning a wedding right now that places will show us the bride and groom suites, or everyone wants to know how we figured out who was going to propose to who, or who stands at the end of the aisle waiting for the other one. And all of those sort of questions, and it's very silly, and I've laughed about all of it, but it's a very real pressure, I think, on the queer community to fit into the mold that we've been handed of what marriage looks like, what family looks like. And I'm curious, beyond the sort of cis and straight version of marriage and of a family that we've finally, again, narrowly earned sort of our rights to. I'm curious if you have any wisdom or advice for people who fall even farther away from kind of the stereotypical example of a nuclear family. I'm thinking about, how many members of the queer community are also polyamorous and have children in polyamorous families, or who, are farther away from the norm, perhaps, that many straight people probably think of when they think of, queer marriage and queer families. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you think that we need to kind of do next to expand from this, because not all of us will have, a picket fence and, 2 kids and have that sort of picture perfect, stereotypical life that for so long was sort of the goal. And now, obviously we need to break out of that a little bit and be able to include everyone and their definitions of family. So curious if you have any advice for
that's really interesting. And I would say throw away the rule book. And I would also say, and I say this all the time, we have to stop asking people for directions to a place they've never been. When I talk about that well-worn path, I mean, you just think about it when you go hiking, right? And there's a trail that somebody has sort of made through the thicket of trees, and you can kind of follow those footprints, or follow that what's been laid down before you, because this is the way that people have always gone. And obviously going another way is scary, right? Because what the hell is out there? And people have gone this way for a reason, right? And and the fact that they've gone this way lets you ease into a sense of safety. But I think there's something so powerful about making your own traditions. As it relates to me and Dr. Matt, I proposed to him first. I don't think there was ever any doubt, that I would. Anybody who's known me for 5 minutes, but I think, really not to be outdone, Dr. Matt counter proposed to me. And I thought it was so, beautiful. First of all, I'm still very upset with him. I hate being surprised. And so it really did surprise me. And so I've not forgiven him. But part of what he said at the moment was, and I thought it was so beautiful and profound, as he said, I wanted you to feel that same joy and, shock that I got to feel. I wanted you to be able to have that moment. And he was like, because we're creating our own rules, that doesn't have to be withheld from you. Because, I mean, even in the context of straight relationships, I'm sure there's so many straight relationships where, there's a guy who sort of misses out on that part of the celebration, and on what that means for somebody to, usually in an elaborate way. This was pretty low key, as you got the sense that I like things to be pretty low key. So he did it well. We just went to dinner. But nevertheless, for a lot of cis men, that joy of having somebody who you love so deeply and wholly and fully, saying that they want to spend the rest of their lives with you. I mean, I'm so profoundly grateful that I'm in a relationship and, where that can be the case. And whereas we think about our wedding, we can do anything, whatever way we want, right? And so it's this dual challenge and all of us, who've been in school, right? There's something calming about having instructions, right? Versus when, your teacher's like, write whatever you want. And you're like, how do I know if I'm succeeding? Right? Like,
exactly. There's something easy about being able to kind of fall back on a script. And I think anyone who's ever watched a rom-com, it has the same script. And it's nice to, in some sense, be able to write your own story fully. But
it is really scary.
But there are other times too when it's like, I wish that there was just a rule book. But 99% of the time, though, I fully agree with you that it's nice to be sort of forced into writing.
Yeah, but you know what? You're writing the rules for you.
Right.
You're writing the rules for what works. For you, and that's incredibly powerful. But I do think that a part of what also is frustrating, certainly as a queer person of color, is that still in the broader queer spaces and most queer spaces, there still is not a complete sense of welcome for queer people of color in all of those spaces. Yeah. And so that is something that I think our community still has to really wrestle with, because we're a community where folks know exactly what it feels like to be treated differently because of who you are and how you identify. And we have to take stock of the fact that in many respects in the queer community, there are still folks who, because of the color of their skin, because of how much money they make, are kept out in some ways. Sometimes very, specifically told to, that you're not welcome, but also there are all the subtle ways in which folks are made to not feel welcome. And so that is a part still of the work that is yet to be done. And I think particularly here in Philadelphia, we remember the debate around adding the black and brown stripes to the flag. I was on the mayor's LGBTQ commission at the time, when we moved forward with that under the leadership of Amber Hikes. And, that was a national discussion. And now I think this Pride, most of the Pride flags I've seen have included the trans flag as well as the black and brown stripes. But that conversation,
that's from the employee research group that I mentioned. So thank you.
There you go.
They added it right away. They're on it.
At the time, you go back and look at some of the comments from other queer folks, and they were laced with deep racism that was incredibly painful to watch unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I definitely think that that's kind of, especially in the past year, that's definitely one of the pivots that people are making as we explore kind of what's next for our community, especially in the time of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's so important for us to identify where those gaps still exist in our own community. And now I know we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to get to some of the excellent questions that our readers dropped for us to chat about as well. So the first one that I want to make sure I get is, how broken is our political system? A heavy question, but they're all heavy questions. And I know, you had mentioned that, that none of these are easy, so I apologize. But I know you had mentioned that our political system is broken, and this
turns out our political system, Annie, is pretty broken.
Yeah. And this reader said, I agree, we can get nothing done. Is it beyond repair?
The sad thing, right, is that for many people, the system is not broken, it's fixed. For many people, the system's working just fine. It's broken for the vast majority of us, though. And that requires us, first of all, getting people to see that treating everybody with respect and dignity doesn't diminish people who are already being treated with respect and dignity. That equality is a renewable resource. And that a lot of times it's not a Venn diagram, right? Doing the right thing and also doing the thing that is the best thing economically, the best thing from a policy standpoint. So often it's not a Venn diagram, it's just a circle. It's just a circle.
Yeah.
Those two things are the same. And I'm prone to say, particularly when we think about this from the perspective of our economy. And Governor Wolf talked about this at the press conference that we did, rallying for the passage of the Fairness Act when we reintroduced it. Doing the right thing by LGBTQ folks is great for our economy. Equity is a superior growth model, actually. When we treat people with respect and dignity, and when we make sure that our organizations just don't have ornamental diversity, but when you have folks where you work in other places, where you do have editors that come from a variety of different backgrounds, when you all are talking to sources that are diverse and have a variety of different lived experiences, that allows us to govern in a way that we are not missing folks who ought to be a part of the conversation. And from your perspective, to tell holistic stories that reflect the reality of what people are dealing with. And so I think a part of the way we ensure that our government represents all people in terms of what it does, the people in our government have to represent the people they hope to serve. I mean, it's not good enough. It is not good enough to have somebody say, I wave a flag, I'm an ally, good. I mean, that's nice, that's wonderful. We need allies. But that's not good enough in terms of the representation that's needed at every single level of government from a variety of different perspectives, not just more queer folks, but more working people, more, disabled folks. I mean, a variety of different people. We need all those folks reflected.
Yeah, we definitely do. I know that's something that a lot of journalism outlets have been grappling with and having even a reckoning about, trying to figure out how to make sure that, if our coverage needs to be equitable across and from every outlet, that means having representation internally and externally. So I really appreciate that point. And then last question before we wrap. One of the questions from one of our readers was, are you finding that you're dealing with passive or not so passive homophobia in legislature?
I think for anybody who's followed my career, I think it's safe to say I'm not a safe harbor for BS. And I call it out very easily and quickly. And I think with that, most of my colleagues are very respectful to me, frankly, and I'm respectful to them. So certainly there have been, when I first got there, I'll never forget, and this was more about my age than anything else, but I'll never forget one of my colleagues who will remain nameless, saying to me in the back room, our little ante room, we're getting coffee, and it's like a couple of weeks after I got sworn in. They said, how old are you? Oh my God, you're so young to be here. And they weren't saying it as a compliment. And I said, yeah, and I got here 3 times earlier than you did, so I have a lot to teach you. That's sort of how I handle that. And so they never brought that up again. And so, I think most of my colleagues, have treated me with respect. I treat them all with respect. And, when I call them out, it's about their really bad ideas. But many of my colleagues, even folks who I deeply, deeply disagree with, are people who, are wonderful family people, have, great families, and, I've met them and I know them, and, I've had good conversations with them. And so I would tell you, not really, but I think the value of it is there have been conversations that have been completely different because I was there. I
Right.
think about, Representative Benham, who's not only has the distinction of being the first bisexual, person ever elected to the General Assembly, but she also is one of the first people ever elected who, is autistic on the spectrum. And we were having a debate the other day, about something about folks who are on the spectrum. And when she spoke, it cut through in a way that I think even folks who just wanted to be allies, right? What she had to say cut through in a way that was so powerful. And you see that over and over again, right? When we're talking about issues as it relates to women's rights, healthcare, whatever. Sure, you can have, men who get up and say great things and say, we support you. But you had so many of my colleagues, Representative O'Mara and Representative Kruger and Representative Hambidge, if folks go back and look at some of the debates we've been having on the floor, and the stories that they've shared have been so powerful, and I think cut through in a way that nobody else could have, because that's their life. There's something so powerful about just being who the hell you are and talking honestly and authentically about your life, because there's so many other people who feel exactly how you feel, who have never been seen, heard, or spoken for.
Yeah. Well, I think there isn't a better sentiment to wrap on than be who the hell you are. I think
That's right.
That's a perfect place to end. Well, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation and compelling interview. Thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank all of our.
Thank you, and thank your team for putting this together, and for your flexibility as we, are in the thick of the budget.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to also, of course, thank all of our readers, all of our audience members who have joined us tonight. Please keep an eye out for future virtual events as well. As I already said, we cannot touch upon every single LGBTQ issue in one Inquirer Live, so we will definitely be, going past this. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and we will absolutely be working hard to come up with a series of further events and programming pertaining to LGBTQ related issues and topics. So thank you again for coming, for your questions, and please everyone have an excellent night.
Bye everybody.